be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So because today is Batman Day, a day to celebrate all things Batman related, I figured what we would do is we would run over what I consider to be probably one of the greatest stories ever written, the Tower of Babel. Now, the Tower of Babel was written by writer Mark Waid, and it is, in a lot of ways, the definitive Batman story. And I know this seems kind of ironic, saying that it's a Justice League story, but as we progress through this, I think things will begin to make sense. But what we do here is we initially pick up with Ra's al Ghul. Now, people pronounce it Ra's al Ghul, some pronounce it Ra's al Ghul. I'm gonna go with Ra's just because I think it sounds cooler. But the idea here is that Mark Waid is basically just giving us a depiction. He's kind of refreshing us with the character of Ra's al Ghul. And what I mean by that is, historically in DC Comics, Ra's has not really been your stereotypical villain. He's not really been a guy who just wants to take over the world. He's had motive, and that's one of the reasons why I think DC excels so well when it comes to creating bad guys, because they're not run-of-the-mill. Characters like Magneto, for example, fall directly into this category in Marvel Comics in the sense that he's identifiable. With Ra's al Ghul, I wouldn't say he's the most identifiable villain, but he does have motive, and he is intriguing for a lot of different people. I would categorize him, as much as I hate to say it, as an extreme environmentalist. And what I mean by this is, in DC Comics, Ra's al Ghul is a guy who is obsessed with the idea that humanity has effectively become a plague on society. And this wasn't simply an idea that he just came up with one day. This comes as an extension of his longevity due to the Lazarus pits. And the result is that over the course of his life, he's seen humanity engage in war, he's seen humanity become self-destructive, he's seen humanity systematically basically destroy the planet. And so his idea has always been to effectively cull a huge portion of humanity and shrink the population down to a minuscule number. And so this is the entire foundation behind his plan in this story. Now, what Mark Waid does when I say he's refreshing us is basically showing us how cruel Ra's al Ghul can be. And what I mean is there is a servant who was supposed to take care of a tiger, but because of the fact that the servant fed the tiger chocolate out of kindness, it ended up killing the tiger. And the result was that Ra's al Ghul is outraged here. Now, what's interesting about this is Ra's al Ghul isn't outraged because it was a tiger he loved that died. It's because this tiger was one of only the only two tigers left in existence of this particular breed, and could have repopulated the entire population of that tiger breed. But because it's dead, it means that breed is now extinct. There's no way for that breed to reproduce anymore, and this man who fed it chocolate had single-handedly wiped out an entire species. And so what Ra's al Ghul does is he instructs one of his servants to basically kill this guy, to show him the same kind of kindness and effectively get rid of him. And of course he begs for his life, but this just shows us how cruel Ra's al Ghul can really be, that he's having a man executed because he killed a tiger. But more so than that, it's Ra's al Ghul's principles. He believes in something, he stands for something, he has conviction, and he refuses to let anything get in the way. And so what we do here is we transition to his conversation with his daughter Talia. Now, Talia has an interesting scenario here. Of course, for those of you guys who are very knowledgeable about DC Comics, you know that Talia al Ghul is the mother of Damian Wayne, and of course she had that child with Bruce Wayne, albeit against Bruce's will. But the fact is that child was conceived. But the idea of Talia and Bruce are kind of this weird situation. Ra's al Ghul is obsessed with the idea that Bruce Wayne, because of his cunning, because of his guile, because of his capabilities, and simply just being a man, but being able to go toe-to-toe against Superman, Ra's is obsessed with this notion that Batman will replace him one day. He sees him as kind of an heir. And so he's always coveted the notion of capturing Batman and having him become the next leader, I guess the next replacement for Ra's al Ghul himself. And so what we do is we find out that apparently Ra's al Ghul is in possession of some kind of artifact or some kind of schematics, and he intends to use those schematics to carry out an unknown plan. And so what we do is we switch to Gotham City while Batman is paying the respects to his family, and we find that someone has removed the coffins of Thomas and Martha Wayne. Now, this is a huge deal for the character of Bruce Wayne, and the reason why is because if anything is his Achilles heel, it's his parents. The one way to always get to Bruce Wayne is to do something with his parents, to desecrate his parents' graves, as we saw with this, or in some form or fashion force him to hallucinate his parents. It doesn't mean that he'll be easily defeated, but it simply means that it's the best way to get to him. Now, what we're going to learn is that this is actually a mistake, and it's not the kind of attention that Ra's al Ghul was looking for. But the fact remains is from this point, we actually jump to Martian Manhunter. And with Martian Manhunter here in this situation, he's being watched by some individuals who appear to be henchmen belonging to Ra's al Ghul, and they shoot him with a rocket. Now, this this rocket contains these microscopic nanites, and we don't initially know what they do. Instead, all we know is that a fire has broken out and that Wonder Woman and Wally West are responding. Now, Mark Waid gives us a little bit of banter between the two of them. This isn't really anything significant. This is really just designed to show us camaraderie between the two, that they're very close friends. But as they're having their conversation, a man just runs wildly in front of them through the woods, set on fire. And so the initial belief is that maybe this is just a crazy person, perhaps it's a metahuman whose powers have somehow just woken up and they don't know how to control them. But as they go through and as they begin putting this fire out, of course, Wally West uses his powers and so on, they realize that it's Martian Manhunter himself, that for some reason, he's been set on fire. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with Martian Manhunter, we don't really need to have a great big huge in-depth conversation about him, but fire is his weakness. Fire is the kryptonite of Martian Manhunter, and so the fact that he has been effectively set on fire is the definitive way to incapacitate him. And so what we do is we transition away from Martian Manhunter and we pick up at the United Nations. Now, this is a relatively important plot point. It's not the most important, but it's something I'd like you to keep in the back of your head. As it stands right now, there are two nations who are on the fringe of declaring war against one another. They haven't quite done it yet, but all they're really waiting for is someone to be in the wrong place at the wrong time in order for things to pop off. But while they're in the middle of having their conversation, or while they're in the middle of meeting, they're interrupted by Aquaman and Plastic Man. Now, Aquaman really doesn't need an explanation here. Most everybody knows who he is, but one thing that I want to emphasize is that in this variation of Aquaman, he's not the one that you guys most likely think of from the 1970s. He's not the guy that talks to fish. This Aquaman is actually pretty badass. He's pretty hardcore, and he really has a special place in the hearts and minds of people who are reading Justice League and his own solo series during this particular point in time. Plastic Man, though, I think needs a little bit of explanation here. For all intents and purposes, and I'm sure DC fans are probably going to scream at me for saying this, but Plastic Man is basically DC's version of Reed Richards from Marvel Comics. And I know that DC fans hate that comparison. I know that comparison actually just drives them up the wall, but Plastic Man's name is Patrick O'Brien, and he is quite literally, I wouldn't say a man made of plastic, but he has all the same principles as plastic. He's elastic and so on and so forth, but his body is basically in a state of flux. He's essentially not really liquid, but he's not really solid. He's more or less a liquid plastic. It's the best way I know how to describe it. Of course, he's the byproduct of an experiment that had gone wrong, but the fact remains here that with him being, being alongside Aquaman and the two of them being attacked, we learn that this is being done by the same individuals, or at the very least, the same forces of Ra's al Ghul that had attacked John Jones. And so, of course, with Plastic Man having the ability to mold his body to different forms and things like that, he takes on boxing gloves in order to fight these different foes, and Aquaman seems to be fighting as well. But in the midst of this conflict, Plastic Man is basically frozen. Now, again, the reason why this works is because with Plastic Man effectively being plastic, when plastic freezes, it hardens, and if it's touched or if it's hit, it'll shatter. And that seems to be exactly what would possibly happen with Plastic Man. But more interesting than this, in the midst of the conflict, Aquaman is attacked with water, and the result is that he absolutely freaks out. He absolutely loses his mind. And so while Aquaman is panicking, of course, Plastic Man is broken or seems to have been completely shattered. But with Aquaman freaking out about water, this really raises some eyebrows, because the question is, why would a character who literally needs water to survive suddenly be afraid of it? Now, again, these questions that you're probably having will be answered, but what we do here is we switch to the Justice League Watchtower and we pick up with Superman. And what Superman is doing is using his eyes, his vision, to basically analyze the skin of Martian Manhunter. And what he tells us is that it was covered in nanites that had trace elements of magnesium. And of course, magnesium is a very flammable substance. And so all it took was for something was for magnesium to interact with the skin of John Jones, and it immediately bursts into flames. And so picking up with Aquaman and picking up with Plastic Man, we of course see Wally West and we see Wonder Woman coming to the fray, or coming to their assistance. And Wally West, with his super speed being the Flash, of course is able to more or less reassemble Plastic Man, get him back together again, and they take them back to the Justice League Tower. And so where Superman tries to contact Batman and he tries to get a hold of him and figure out what it is that's going on, if Batman has ever been attacked or if he has any idea of what's taking place, we see Batman in the middle of a confrontation with some forces, and he's basically giving them the business. It's the best way I know how to put it. But with Superman asking Batman whether or not he knows what's going on, Batman says he doesn't know. No one's been killed so far, according to Superman, but the Justice League is being targeted by somebody. Now, something I want you to pay attention here is that Batman doesn't really seem to be surprised. Now, this is Mark Waid just kind of toying with us. This is Mark Waid playing with us. this. And the reason why I say that is because Batman is he has the best poker face in the world, is the best way I know how to say it. He very rarely gives any inclination of whether or not he's angry or he's happy when he's Batman. When he's Bruce Wayne, he has personality, but that's the costume. You know, the Batman is the character that we're talking about here. And the result is that he doesn't really give Superman hardly anything. But more so than this, Batman is a man on a mission. He is single-handedly going out and trying to find the coffins of his parents. And so the result is that he's not really focusing on what it is that's happening to the Justice League. He doesn't really care what's going on with them. This is both a hindrance and a benefit. And we're going to find out why it's such a huge hindrance and why it's somewhat of a benefit later on. But from here, we kind of pick up back with the Justice League in the Watchtower, and Wonder Woman and Wally West. They're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. They're trying to understand what it is that's taking place. But what they also say is that because these assassins were somehow able to locate them, they can't just leave Aquaman and they can't just leave Plastic Man by themselves. But in the end, they have to. And so while Aquaman is somewhat capacitated, he's still a pretty dangerous foe to go against. And so they basically leave Plastic Man with, I guess, under Aquaman's attention, and they vacate the premises. And the idea here is to go find Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern. And so from here, we pick back up again with Ra's al Ghul. And Ra's al Ghul is using a tower of some sort for reasons that we don't initially know or aren't initially told to us. And so while he's in the middle of doing that, we basically transition again with Superman, and we pick back up with the Daily Planet. Now, this is a really cool element of the story that Mark Waid's giving us. And the reason why is because we think of Superman and we think of him as a guy that can do everything. We think of him as a guy with super strength, super intelligence, so on and so forth. There's really nothing that he's not capable of doing. There's simply just foes out there that are more powerful than he is, but he always overcomes. But the great aspect about this is that Mark Waid rolls the character of Clark Kent into the story by telling us that despite Superman's knowledge, there's some things that he just doesn't know, simply because of the fact that he can't be everywhere at once. And so being a reporter, Clark Kent gives him access to various documents, gives him access to various stories that may have just flown under his radar under any normal set of circumstances, especially with the fact that the Justice League is being attacked. He's not really listening to everything that's going on out there. And so going into the Daily Planet, analyzing the billboard, analyzing footage that may be there and may give him an indication of who's attacking him or something that just seems out of the ordinary is a great opportunity for him. But what happens is that while he's talking to Perry White throws him a newspaper, and when Superman reads it, the newspaper is absolute gibberish. The words are all rearranged and they're all nonsensical. And the initial thought here for us is that, well, maybe this has something to do with Superman. Maybe Superman has somehow been affected by whatever it is that this group's using to attack the Justice League. But as it turns out, it's not just Superman. In fact, it's everyone. It's every single person on the face of the planet cannot read. Everything they see is absolutely insane. And so what ends up happening here is we pick up with Wonder Woman and Wally West. And with the two of them being at Kyle Rayner's apartment, the issue here is that because of the fact that they can't read the numbers, they're really just kind of guessing on what it is that's happening. They're really just sort of shooting for the best, hoping they have the right location, which they do. But once they enter the room, they find Kyle Rayner just sitting there. Kyle Rayner's not really doing anything. And what we learn is that for some reason or another, Kyle Rayner has been completely blinded. He has no sight whatsoever. Now, what I want to do here is take a second and have a little bit of a discussion about Kyle Rayner, because I know there are a lot of Green Lantern fans out there. And for those of you guys who are consistently read up on Green Lantern, or if you've seen Benny's videos at Comic Storian about Green Lantern, you guys probably know Kyle Rayner. But assuming you're just somebody who stumbled across this video because it says Batman betrayed the Justice League, and you're curious about Kyle Rayner, he's like the second most popular Green Lantern, I would argue. Some people say it's John Stewart. It really just kind of depends on where you're coming from. But the concept of Kyle Rayner came out of an event called Emerald Twilight in the early 1990s, 1993, I think it was. And this was basically a set of events whereby DC had come to the conclusion that Hal Jordan just wasn't selling as the Green Lantern. And so what they wanted to do was create another Green Lantern, introduce a new guy. And so Hal Jordan more or less went insane after his city was destroyed from the fallout of the death of Superman. And the result was that he christened himself Parallax and began attacking everybody. He basically became a bad guy. He was wildly powerful, and it made for some really good storytelling. But the result was that as the last lantern, or I guess the last lantern ring, it was passed on to Kyle Rayner, who was an artist at the time, and he became the new Green Lantern. Now, he was very, very popular because instead of simply being like Hal Jordan and creating wrenches or creating boxing gloves, or simple objects, Kyle Rayner would create very intricate objects. He would create, like Gundams, different things like that, these extremely advanced mechanical devices. And he really allowed the reader's imagination to run wild with the kind of things that he could do. And so this is simply just a point in DC Comics when Kyle Rayner is still the Green Lantern. But what we do is we pick up here with issue number 2. And issue number 2 basically just kind of recaps what we saw in issue number 1, that the world is effectively going to pot because of the fact that people simply can't read. They can't read normally. And so what we find is that Batman has basically been tracing the caskets of his parents, and he arrives at the facility of Ra's al Ghul. Now, what's interesting about this is Batman, at least the indication is that he doesn't seem to know what's been going on. He's been so focused, he's had tunnel vision in the extreme on finding his parents' bodies that he doesn't really know everything that's happening here. And so the result is that once he busts in, he's kind of learning at the same time that anarchy has taken over, that anarchy reigns supreme. Now again, for Batman, that's not the most important thing. That's not really relevant to him at the moment. And the reason why is because Ra's al Ghul shows Batman what has become of his parents' coffins. And what we find is that Ra's al Ghul is threatening to descend them into the Lazarus pits. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar again with the Lazarus pits in DC, these really kind of change based on the writer. Of course, Scott Snyder did a little bit of retconning with the Lazarus pits and establishing that these pits that Ra's al Ghul uses, they don't really exist in their purest form. The only person to ever really use the pure form of the substance that goes into the Lazarus pits that allows people to be revived was Vandal Savage. But the fact remains here that regardless of what writers are doing, what writers are changing with the story, there's a fundamental set of principles with the Lazarus pits, and those principles are the pits resurrect people. They're called the Lazarus pits in a lot of ways because of Lazarus from Judeo-Christianity, but the pits effectively resurrect the dead. The problem here is that they will go through a bout of temporary insanity, and depending on the story, the insanity is long-term. And so the indication here is that Ra's al Ghul intends to drop the coffins of Thomas and Martha Wayne into the Lazarus pits and bring them back to life. Now, we'll talk about why this is an important thing here in a second when we transition back to Batman, but what we do is we move over to Kyle Rayner. Now, with the situation of Kyle Rayner, no one really knows what's going on. The idea from Diana Prince and from Wally West is that somebody came in there and rendered him blind, but Kyle Rayner says that's not the case. Instead, he simply just woke up and he could not see. And so we don't exactly know why this had happened, but what we find out at the same time while this is going on is that Aquaman seems to realize how it is that people were able to track them down, how it is that these guys were able to locate them. And what he does is he begins more or less musing to himself, but then he also contacts Wally West and Diana Prince, and what he tells them is that through some form or another, some kind of technology or something, they were able to tap into the frequencies of the Justice League. Now, for those of you guys who are curious how it is the Justice League knows where all the members are, this is exactly it. They have a radio frequency they operate on that no one else can access, or no one else is supposed to access. But apparently these forces of Ra's al Ghul have been able to access this frequency, and so they're effectively just homing beacons. These individuals are able to trace the location of each member of the Justice League and track them down and find them. And so while they bust into the room with Kyle Rayner and Wally West and Wonder Woman, they begin launching an assault against each of them. Now we'll find out exactly how it is this impacts them. And what we do is we pick up here with Superman out in the city itself. And what Superman finds is that because people can't read, everything again is descending into chaos. And so at this point, it's really just damage control. But at the same time, they're also relying on intelligence to give them answers to things that are happening. And so what happens is they reach out to Oracle. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Oracle, of course, is Barbara Gordon. I guess older fans of DC Comics are well aware of this fact. It really is, it's the height of her character's popularity, if I'm going to be honest with you guys. But Barbara Gordon becoming Oracle was a byproduct of the Killing Joke, where she was shot by the Joker and she was paralyzed. And the result was that instead of being a superhero, instead of actually running around as Batgirl, she came to function the best way she knew how. And the result was that she became an information broker, but she also became the backbone of both the Bat family and the Justice League itself. She was really the person they rely on in order to monitor everything that's going on with the world and let them know what needs attention and what doesn't. And so what happens is that with Barbara Gordon looking at everything, what she says is that people aren't going insane. People aren't going crazy. Instead, there's a signal being sent out to the world that's modifying the minds of humanity. And it's modified the minds of humanity in the point, or I guess in the way that it's impacted the language centers, and it's effectively made it so that people can't read normally. Now, the reason why this is a huge deal is because it's not just people who are crashing cars, it's not just people who are panicking because they can't read correctly. Everything is being impacted. Military technology is being impacted. People don't know if the orders that they're reading are orders to patrol a sector or to launch nuclear weapons across the world. Doctors who are reading charts for a patient don't know if the patient just got out of surgery or if the patient needs to go into surgery. They don't know if the person needs heart surgery or if the person needs a liver transplant. The world itself is simply just devolving into chaos. And so what happens is we jump over to the apartment of Kyle Rayner, and we pick back up again with Wonder Woman and Wally West. And what happens is that some superpowered individual is attacking Wonder Woman. And so Wonder Woman begins to fight this person off as best she knows how. But what we learn is that this is actually not the case. Instead, there is a virtual reality microchip in her mind, and that reality microchip has tricked her eyes or tricked her mind into believing that there is a force there, that there is a person, there's an enemy that she simply cannot, that she has to fight against, more or less. And so she's being made to hallucinate something that isn't really there. And so again, we pick up with the Flash, we pick up with Kyle Rayner, and again, because of the fact that the Flash is a character that moves at such fast speeds, because there have been stories where Wally West was able to outrun the universe itself, the question is, how do you stop a person that can do that? How do you stop a person that can think and move at super speed? Well, what they do is they shoot him with some kind of a device that sends him through a series of epileptic seizures at the speed of light. And so it effectively shuts his body down. And the reason why this was done at the speed of light is because if his body just experienced normal epileptic seizures, he would still be able to function, because he'd still be able to move through objects or do whatever he needs to do before the impulses going through his muscles actually took effect. So if, for example, for the sake of argument, we said that his mind was sending impulses through his body, forcing him to seize every 3 seconds, he would still be able to act for, in between that 3-second time period. But sitting it through at the speed of light means basically he's experiencing seizures at the same frequency or the same pace that he could possibly move. And so it's really metaphysical here, but basically this is Mark Waid's way of just telling us that the Flash is not going to be able to operate. He's going to be completely incapacitated. But what we do here is we transition back to Metropolis, and in truth, this is one of the reasons why a lot of people sort of hassled the character of Superman. And what I mean here is, because Superman is so capable, one of the big questions is, how do you create a story that Superman isn't able to fix everything? And I'm not saying this is an example where he is. What I'm saying is that with the city of Metropolis being incapacitated in such a way to where its citizens have their entirety of the English language all mixed up, what Superman does is he captures a device that previously belonged to Brainiac. And what Brainiac had done is, because he had basically traveled the world, or traveled the multiverse, capturing cities and putting them in domes and imprisoning them, Superman kept one of these devices after his last battle with Brainiac. And what Superman does is he basically reprograms the device in order to emit a signal, or emit a kind of, I guess, a field of sorts that disrupts the signal that's screwing up people's language centers. And so what this does is it allows the city of Metropolis to return to some measure of normalcy. But this is an example of how Superman can just do whatever needs to be done in any particular circumstance in order to fix a problem. Now, of course, Mark Waid is again pulling some bigger strings here and telling us, and we're actually going to see that there are some things that Superman just can't do. But what we do is we transition back to the apartment of Kyle Rayner. And this again is Mark Waid telling us that despite Kyle Rayner's abilities, despite having the Green Lantern ring and being able to manifest virtually anything he wants to, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if he's blind. And the reason why is because with him being an artist, he needs to see what it is that he wants to do. But at the same time, of what use is being able to manifest all these incredible things if he can't actually target anything, if he can't see what he's supposed to be attacking? And so for Kyle Rayner, this is an interesting struggle for him, because one, he's not really used to being in a position to where he's so powerless, but two, because he has an inner struggle here. In one part of his mind, he wants to defeat Talia al Ghul and those forces who are here that have incapacitated him, Wonder Woman and Wally West. At the same time, while he's lashing out, he doesn't want to harm his friends. And so he's really just kind of relying on sound in order to tell him where these forces are that are walking around. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. He's still not able to attack these guys. He's still not able to defeat them. And so from here, we pick back up again with Bruce Wayne, and he's basically being told by Ra's al Ghul that if Ra's drops the caskets of Thomas and Martha Wayne into the Lazarus pits, that it will revitalize them. It will bring them back to life. Now for Bruce Wayne, this is interesting. This is actually a really cool moment in the story, because this sees the possibility of Bruce Wayne's parents coming back. And for Bruce, this is a huge internal struggle for him, because what do you do when you have the opportunity to see your parents come back, and the death of your parents were the foundation of everything? For Bruce Wayne, this is an inner struggle, because if Thomas and Martha Wayne were to come back, well then his purpose is gone. His purpose is to defeat crime, but it's rooted in the fact that his parents were murdered in a senseless act of violence. If his parents come back, then of what use is that basis for him anymore? He can't feed on their loss as a reason to continue going. But at the same time, he wants his parents back. He is a guy who lost his parents and he's always wanted them to come back. That's always been a staple of his character. But in the end, he also comes to the realization that for Thomas and Martha Wayne to be brought back from the dead in this capacity is dishonoring their memory, because they never would have gone for anything like that. They would have accepted the fact things that happen beyond your control, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes all you can do is just cope with the situation as it exists. And so that's what Bruce Wayne does. He declines the offer of Ra's al Ghul, but more so than that, he basically attacks him on the idea that Ra's al Ghul has sent the world into a tailspin. He sent humanity into a state of absolute chaos. But in the midst of this conflict, Ra's al Ghul pulls out a chunk of red kryptonite. Now, the reason why this is a huge deal is because with red kryptonite, it causes Superman to have spontaneous mutations. There's no real idea of how red kryptonite will affect him, in the same sense that green kryptonite will depower and eventually kill him. Now, we'll get into a little more of that discussion here in a minute, but with Batman being shocked the way it is, or the way he is, the question is, where did Ra's al Ghul get this red kryptonite, and why does he know the significance of it? Why does he know this is important as opposed to just a red chunk of rock somewhere? And so what happens is we transition again back to the apartment of Kyle Rayner, and we pick up with Talia al Ghul and the forces of Ra's al Ghul leaving, but Martian Manhunter suddenly appears. And Martian Manhunter was believed to have been incapacitated, but he's wearing a bodysuit that seems to counteract the effects of the nanites, and he begins taking on the forces of Talia al Ghul, in addition to Aquaman joining the fray. And so while these forces are going at one another, while they're battling one another, something that I'd also like you to take note of here is that Talia does not necessarily agree with everything her father's doing. She does not necessarily agree with her father's belief system. Now, this has been a source of contention between Talia and Ra's al Ghul for a long time. She's always seemed to disagree with what it is that her dad's doing, but in the end, she always allies herself. She always goes back home. And so I wouldn't say that at the moment this is a huge deal, but what ends up happening is, of course, with Superman showing up, this is effectively the seminal moment of the Tower of Babel. Whenever you guys hear about the story, what's coming up is the moment that you think of. With Talia al Ghul, I guess, trying to defeat these individuals, or at the very least trying to get away, Superman appearing, he begins fighting them, but Batman starts communicating with him. And Batman is basically saying, or getting ready to tell them, you cannot stay there. You have to leave. You have to take off. You have to vacate. But before Superman can get away, Talia al Ghul pulls out red kryptonite, and the result is that it begins causing unchecked mutations in Superman. And at the end of all this, Superman's skin seems to turn translucent. He seems to be exposed to a bombardment of solar radiation. Now, in the next video, we'll get into a discussion of what this means for Superman. But in the last few moments of this particular comic, Batman tells him, get out of there before it's too late. Get away as fast as you can. But he says all the traps and all the signal trackers, all these things that have incapacitated the Justice League, they all belong to Batman. That he is the one that did this to the Justice League. He's the reason why they have all been incapacitated. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. I really hope you guys are enjoying this. Of course, part 2 will be out later on today, so you guys should get a kick out of everything that's going on so far. But if you guys dig this kind of thing, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, drop a like, show me that you guys like it, and make sure you leave a comment. So yeah, we'll catch you guys later. Peace.